Awesome. Welcome to reInvent. And how cool is this sports forum? How many of you guys have checked out the e-games in the back? I know I want to go check out this golf simulator to my right. I guess you all's left after this panel. So thank you all so much for coming to this panel, which will be security strategies in the ever-evolving media industry. I'm so thrilled to bring together cybersecurity leaders from Amazon Prime Video, the NHL, and DraftKings to discuss the evolving media landscape and their key concerns. Speakers today will explore challenges like cyber attacks on live sports and also how they're thinking about protecting intellectual property in entertainment. Today's discussion will highlight the importance of cross-industry collaboration, innovative security strategies, and also the need for protective measures to safeguard against emerging threats. This panel is going to cover the impact as well of generative AI, our favorite topic, on security and AI programs, and addressing risks such as deepfakes and the need to maintain content integrity and user experience. So with that said, I want to introduce myself real quick as well as move on to our esteemed panel here. My name is Nancy Wang. I'm a venture partner at Fleeces and also your moderator for today. And it's my pleasure to be here today with such a distinguished group of security leaders. And so with that said, we're going to start with Brian to my left here to introduce yourself and your role.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Nancy. Appreciate it. My name is Brian Lozada. I'm the Director of Security for Amazon GME, which is Games, Media, and Entertainment.
Thanks for having me. Moses Temaswamy. I'm the Director of Information Security at DraftKings.
I'm Dave Monroe. I'm responsible for cybersecurity at the National Hockey League. It's great to be here with you guys.
Awesome.
That's awesome. What a good combination of companies here. And maybe just dive right in. Can you start by telling us about some of your emerging cybersecurity threats that are facing your business and how you're thinking about them as they evolve, especially in the context of AI and all the new risks that AI brings?
I'll kick us off. I think that's a great question. I think when you look at media and entertainment, you look at sports, how it's evolved over the last few years and how technology has driven that transformation. With that transformation is you have all of these emerging threats. As technology evolves, the threat actors have taken advantage of that technology as well and are targeting kind of how media entertainment is delivered, whether that's over streaming, whether that's kind of like looking at using that technology to impact the integrity of content, which I think is a very important topic to discuss in this day and age, just because it really does impact how our consumers are looking at all of that content. I think those areas are going to be evolving for the next few years, and I think we really need to put a focus from a security perspective on how to really generate that security from a content perspective. So.
And Moses, maybe moving on to you. What regulatory challenges exist as gaming converges with traditional media, and particularly regarding content moderation, IP rights, things like privacy, data privacy, and also consumer protection?
Yeah, so regulators and us, we have essentially the same things that we want. We want our constituents and their data to be private as possible, right? As we blur the lines, like you just mentioned, between like media and gaming, it's exactly that. We have to provide as an organization that we have the exact same controls in place to the regulators or even our constituents that we will be providing for their media platforms or any other platform. It's not just us concerned about card data environments or PCI or PII, anything else. It should be across the board. It should be a solid barometer that we're able to present to any new function or feature set that we apply.
And finally, moving to Dave here. As the NHL navigates its digital transformation from more of a traditional infrastructure to cloud-based operations, how are you thinking about addressing the evolving security challenges and also the risk landscape?
It's a real challenge because there's always been a lot of threats, but now they're increasing in complexity, frequency, and overall tenacity. They're really targeting individuals now instead of the whole organization. They're going after, obviously, the players, they're going after the executives, they're going after anyone involved. So we really have to expand our scope to protect the organization. I think the other interesting thing that we face is we are, as you mentioned, transforming, and we're becoming much more data centric. So we have to protect the data at a much greater level than we used to, because it is relied upon not only for those broadcasts, but for partners and other applications that we build. Because if that data has a problem, it could have a financial impact, it could have a reputation or brand impact, it could make it so the fans don't trust the data that's being produced, and that's one of the worst things that could happen in our line of business, is for the fans not to trust what's coming out of the organization of the sport.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, like, how do you, for example, balance and make decisions when potentially, like, the security controls you were just describing might impact end user experience, and particularly, let's say, live streaming a game?
Right, so it's changing, certainly, live streaming. It's a great technological advancement for the fans and for us. It's a higher quality product, but there's more risk involved with it. It used to be kind of a closed system, and now it's open. You're doing cloud broadcast now, where you've got access to things globally. And now that's a great advantage for people working on the game. It's a great advantage for fans as well, but it's also a pretty good advantage for attackers, because it's exposed and now they can access it and really try and enumerate what you're doing in that environment. So you have to think about obviously the larger threat landscape, but you also have to make sure that you can provide a consistent, stable experience, because the users won't tolerate an outage. You miss a second of a game, and that's a horrible situation.
Could have been the game point right there.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially if it happens right when a goal happens. That would be horrible.
And so, of course, we can't talk about cyber threats in today's environment, coming back to Brian here, without mentioning AI, which for us in the security world has been a double-edged sword, right? And so as we navigate tomorrow's digital defense landscape, I want to hear from Brian, what he thinks about the balance between velocity and also purpose, empowered by AI, but also guided by human insight. So Brian, how is Gen AI influencing your security program at Amazon? And as generative AI continues to evolve, what are the key risks as well as challenges you've identified regarding content authenticity and user experience?
Yeah, great question. I think Gen AI is amazing technology. It's an evolving technology. I think it's absolutely at its infancy. But it is neutral technology, and we have to understand that threat actors are going to use this, and they're going to weaponize it, right? It makes attacks less costly for the threat actor. It reduces the time for an attack for a threat actor, and it gives them scale. It gives them a huge opportunity to attack and to use this technology. How we're looking at it is, how do we balance that customer experience? We are obsessed with our customer experience and making sure that our partners like the NHL and DraftKings, we do stream the NHL on Mondays, right? So again, we want to ensure that that customer experience is good for our consumers. But how do you balance to make sure that whatever we do from a content authenticity perspective doesn't impact the customer viewing, but introduces friction to the threat actors? And I think it's not something that's going to be easy, but I think we need to evolve on how we are actually producing the content and getting it from a live stream into the consumer's hands, and put some innovation behind that stream and how to detect and really counter any type of Gen AI that is coming towards it. I also do think that threat actors are thinking of ways to use that to manipulate the content and even impact how that integrity of the content goes out there. To Dave's point earlier, like the trust of that content, it's critical to the fan experience. It's critical to the consumer experience. And if threat actors are using Gen AI to alter that and then change the way a consumer receives that, we lose trustworthiness and we lose that impact of having a positive experience with our customers, and that's what we want to avoid.
That makes a lot of sense. And Moses, I want to hear from you as well. How are you thinking about really harnessing the power, right, of AI while also protecting against its misuse at DraftKings?
Yeah, so it's an interesting paramount, right? So our customer trust is paramount to us. We also want to be as fast as possible. Velocity means a lot to us as well. So we have to bridge the gap as to what that looks like. And to us, inherently as security professionals, we're supposed to look at the worst case scenario with any new technology, not just Gen AI. So our risks and our exposure is just that much bigger when it comes to our internal resources as well as our customers, right? So data-driven, everything is data-driven, like our internal decision-making points are data-driven. And the customers have access to this, so do the threat actors. So we have to keep our house in check, and that's how we kind of build our strategy. We want to make sure that we empower our end users, our internal engineering teams, et cetera, to use AI technology within guardrails, right? So what hurts us is if a technology is opened up and there's shadow IT and users are using it within our organization without the actual proper guardrails. So we're always behind the curve there, and we do our best to get ahead of it, but that's usually the issue we face. And I feel like our customers rely on us to provide real-time information and services, et cetera, similar to both of these folks. And we can't take a step back to say, all right, we're shutting down services while we validate. So it has to be seamless with the product as well as internal applications and external.
And finally, Dave, I want to hear from you as well on, as Gen AI creates more synthetic content, right? And, as an organization, you need to involve more identity management strategies. How are you thinking about protecting, of course, the digital assets of the NHL, but also the digital identities of your players?
It's really difficult these days to trust what you see, right?
Yeah.
It's very much like the old days of Photoshop first coming around, and you couldn't trust an image. You'd say, oh, that's Photoshopped. We're seeing the same thing with generative AI. People are saying, is that real or not? So I do think we need the ability to easily determine what's Gen AI produced, what's legitimate, what's trusted, versus all the fake stuff that's being created. So obviously we have to deal with that. It's very important, from a cybersecurity perspective as well, knowing who your users are, knowing what data they're accessing, being able to prove that identity is very difficult. We've seen it in a number of the breaches where people have been socially engineered, including organizations in this town that have had significant impacts due to social engineering. And that can come much faster and much easier now with Gen AI. You can clone people, you can create your executive in a video saying, transfer this, even real time in a live, you used to say, well, get on a Zoom meeting, we'll know it's you, we can prove it's you. It's very difficult to do now. So you really have to think about what you can do to authenticate that user beyond the traditional methods. But even the traditional methods need to come back and be more secure. In the old days, you would have maybe a challenge response to something. And I think we might need that to prove who people are, or other strong methods of authentication and identity. But absolutely knowing who our users are, that's the core of a zero trust strategy. The identity, the network segmentation, strong endpoint controls, you need all of those things. And I think identity is the first place to start approaching that, because once you know who that user is, then you can start determining what they should be accessing, what they shouldn't be accessing, and act upon it.
And so, Brian, as Amazon is a content platform, right, and you're the director of security and lead all security initiatives for Amazon Gaming and Media Entertainment, how do you think about working with, for example, sports leagues as well as real-time streaming players to, for example, put authenticity back, right, in the day of Gen AI misinformation, right, synthetic content?
Yeah, synthetic content is it's interesting. I think there's going to be there are a lot of companies out there that are offered that you could create the synthetic content. And there are legitimate uses for it. But again, it's going to get weaponized. So how do we, from a platform perspective, think about detecting that? I think there has to be an opportunity for innovation to happen. Say, we can detect that this is generated with synthetic content and let the consumer know. Why is that? Because I do feel like misinformation with synthetic content is a big risk. I think deep fakes, I think all of that that's out there right now, I think it's a huge impact to our consumers. It's a huge impact to how humans see that content and then make decisions off of that content. And again, that disinformation, I think it's a huge threat to all media. It's not just in live, it's not just in lean back content or in video content, but in every single piece of content that's going out there. If there is no trust in it, I think it's going to impact how humans make decisions. And when you think about just the foundation of media, it's there to give somebody information so that they can make a decision off of that information. And it's also there to hold power to account. But if the consumer cannot trust that content, it really does impact the way that humans make that decision and trust news outlets, media outlets, content, live. And I think we really do need to think about what is the technology that we could put in there to detect it. Is it going to be something as a watermark? Is it going to be something like you see on hey, a blue check mark? I know this came from the Prime Video platform, or I know this is coming from the NHL, right? we have to really think about that. I think as security practitioners in the media and entertainment space, we absolutely need to come together to combat this risk. If we do not, I mean, we're gonna lose the trust of our consumer, and losing the trust of our consumer, it impacts our businesses tremendously.
And actually keying in there, right, the key word is really trust. And so Moses, Dave, I want to hear from you both on how you think about maintaining, especially audience trust, like Brian just described. And we think about Gen AI sponsored content or created content getting more and more sophisticated. How do you maintain that trust?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny that we go back to just the core principles of trust, right? Which is what you are, what you have, or what you know. And it used to be what you are was the defining factor in a multi-factor org. And we're sitting here now talking about that's not the most trustworthy portion of it. So we're reverting back as an industry and looking at, all right, now we start handing out hardware tokens like it's 2001 again to authenticate. But in terms of trust, the way the audience trusts us is making sure they don't see us with a negative context, to make sure that we're not in the front page of a headline, to make sure that their data is not lost in any form of fashion, right? And we take it a step further. We make sure we build properly as a tech-first company. We make sure that we are security-first within all our organizations, that we empower engineering teams, product teams, et cetera, that come to us and build properly and securely. We want to be first to market. That's the nature of the game. But we want to also do it in a respectful manner. And it goes with regulations, et cetera, that we talked about as well. But building properly is always going to be the key to trust. Staying out of the headlines is key to trust. And we go a step further, even more. We're constantly looking at outlets, third parties, for any customer data that is leaked from different sources, and are they tied to DraftKings by any means? And we take proactive approaches to make sure that we let the customers know, hey, this may be a potential failure somewhere, right? So building trust is not just a set it and forget it initiative. It's got to be context, and it's got to be consistent. So we're building within our core values. We build security in, and it just reflects to our customers better.
And I think trust comes from authenticity. A lot of the issues we're facing today, as you're just saying, everything old is new again. We're facing a lot of the same challenges we've faced for a long time. And one of those challenges in the early days of the web was, authenticity of the site, trusting the site. And I think we need similar technology for AI to know that it's being produced by a legitimate organization, or there's some sort of, like Brian mentioned, watermarking or technology to prove that what you're viewing was intended to be, delivered. It's almost like, when TLS or SSL came about with websites back in the day. You didn't know if the website you were going to was a legitimate website or not. And then technology addressed that to help people understand. And if we have some sort of technology to help people understand that it's authentic, then they'll feel more confident about trusting it. Because I think people are naturally skeptical, especially with AI these days. There's a lot of skepticism that the answer is correct, or that what it's producing is real, or that it's legitimate information. And until there's an opportunity for people to say, I feel that what's being produced by that product is something I can trust and that it's authentic, we're going to have a real problem making it a common service for people.
Yeah. And to Dave's point, it's prove it that it's not fake at this point, because there is no verification process. Agreed. And media content, everything is so fast and evolving, it's up to us to start disproving that something is real. So we're working backwards very much in this space, and yeah, we don't have the answers up here, but we're aware of what the challenges are for sure.
And so we have to imagine there might also be a use case where AI-generated synthetic content is positive, and maybe that's the desired outcome. So maybe for the two of you here, can you maybe walk us through what you think through as you balance, let's say, deepfake detection with content innovation? Maybe Dave?
Sure. It's very interesting what's happening with content generation now. We are data-driven. We have a lot of data points, and we can create really cool generated content from the data we're collecting. And that information is, it's official. It's our information, and we want to make sure that it's not obviously tampered with, poisoned. There's a lot of opportunity for people to come in and change that and affect the generative outcome. So we want to make sure what's being delivered to people is the correct data and it's not being somehow manipulated. But at the same time, we know there's going to be constant attacks. We know people are going to try and use that in a way that's against us. And we're just trying to stay on top of it in terms of the attack and defense, right? technology is creating a lot of opportunities for attacking, but it's also creating a lot of opportunities for defense. And we're trying to use that to become much more efficient. I think anyone in cybersecurity knows how much data we deal with. We deal with a massive amount of data coming from a lot of different sources. And to be able to process that effectively and try and detect when things are being abused, we have to use the same tools and the same technologies that attackers are also using. And we have to be able to understand the way it's being used legitimately for our commercial purposes, but also for illicit purposes as well.
Yeah, and our audience is very varied. Our customers are very varied. So we do engage with them a lot, but the content that we provide as DraftKings has to be standard, right? So adding on to what Dave's saying, we have to ensure that whatever we're putting out there is moderated, is more secure than the average just, hey, tag DraftKings on Twitter kind of context, right? And to your point, it's not all doom and gloom, right? We use Gen AI for a lot of our solutions, not just in engineering, but in security. We look at all these tools that used to take teams to administer, and I'm sure there's still teams that are administering them, and it has brought it down a few notches just in the simplicity of how you can integrate it with an organization, with an existing tool sets, and also make sure shelfware is kind of gone out the window as well. So bring it in, make it as adaptive as possible, and let your teams go at it, right? So if you have SOC teams that are administering SIM tools, now you don't need the scale that you once needed, right? So there's definitely a positive to it, and that's how we approach it. And also if you're a lean team, right? Cybersecurity teams are inherently lean. This gives you the option to just use that as a secondary nature and then make sure you're only getting the data that you need. There's so much information, there's so much data, you're constantly trying to parse through them. It's impossible, and with all the fake data that's now being introduced, we rely on the technologies that we have in hand to kind of parse through a lot of that for us.
Yeah, we definitely need to be more efficient, and it's a tool that can absolutely help us be more efficient. As the complexity of the attacks rise, the quality of the attacks improve. To be able to keep up with that, we absolutely need more technology to help us stay on top of all of these issues, because it's never ending, and really becoming an expert in all the facets of defense is almost impossible. You really need additional tools to help you become quicker and more adept at responding to those threats.
Sounds like the beginning of an arms race.
It really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a classic cat and mouse situation where the attackers get smarter, the defenders have to get smarter. We're always learning, but the attack landscape is so vast, to try and stay on top of all of it, it's impossible without collating all this information and processing it somehow. And it used to be a very manual process, and in many cases it still is, dealing with different platforms. That's one of the current challenges. Is there's a lot of great tools and platforms out there for defense and cybersecurity and analytics, but to be able to operate it efficiently and use it well and understand how to wield that tool effectively, you need more help than just, you're
Nancy,
reading the manual.
You mentioned arms race, sorry, but as soon as you do that, you have every company in the world just using that as a buzzword at this point. So we have to make sure, as leaders in the technology space and the security space, that we're vetting through not just, turning on machine learning languages to actual usable information and product and security.
And so, Brian, I want to come back to you because there's something you mentioned early on in the panel around misinformation, right? And the fact that deepfakes are just going to get the attackers become more sophisticated. So we're hearing different strategies from both Dave and Moses, and I know you've been a thought leader in this space and you talk about this pretty extensively. So from an industry perspective, what are some strategies, especially cybersecurity defense strategies, that you think different media organizations especially can take advantage of or learn or implement in this time?
I think for a deepfake detection technology, there are technologies that exist out there that you can detect those deepfakes. Integrating that into platforms like for live or for lean back content or for social media content, organizations need to take that and take it seriously and put it into their product, because you do want to give the consumer the opportunity to say, this is not something that was generated by a human. This is fake. This is something that you shouldn't be taken at face value. So I think a lot of organizations, especially in the media and entertainment space, we need to come together and make something that drives a few things: industry change, policy change on how this technology is used within our platforms, because again, we have to give our consumers the opportunity to defend themselves and really use the information that our platforms are providing so that they could feel confident and trust in using it. I think there's going to be a lot more innovation in this space. Also, when you think about it too, like when you mentioned synthetic media, there's good ways that synthetic media are being used. Content creators want to use synthetic media. Game producers want to use synthetic media. It helps scale, right? It helps scale their environment. It helps scale, or it helps reduce the cost of them generating content. But from a security perspective, how do we put guardrails around that so that it gets put into the platform, consumers can use it with confidence without slowing down the business, right? We have to be very tightly integrated with the business to make sure that we have that right balance. But it is absolutely something that, again, in the media and entertainment industry, we have to have a stance to generate like the industry change. I think policy change, again, really needs to happen so that we can help defend our consumers from this disinformation and deepfakes. I think we're at the infancy of where deepfakes could really impact humanity.
And what I really liked about, I think, your thoughts there is also the focus on a seamless viewer experience, despite everything that's going on behind the scenes, right? And I imagine, Dave, what you said about this arms race, and Moses, what you said about content moderation, right? Keeping up with all the content that's being produced. So this is a good time to actually segue and steer the conversation to our panelists' thoughts on partnership and how you think about working or innovating in-house versus partnering with third parties. And so going back to Dave and Moses, how do you approach, for example, shared responsibilities in security with streaming partners?
I think, as Brian mentioned, tight collaboration. It's very important for us to work together to understand what our risks are, what the threats are, how we can work together to mitigate them. It's very important, obviously, in a live broadcast situation, but I think in any broadcast situation or any content delivery situation, to make sure that the disruption of that or the integrity of that isn't affected. And Brian and Amazon have been excellent with a very close partner with providing information, working together. But it's not just with the partners as well. It's with the other leagues. It's with other organizations. Neil over at MLB has been really at the forefront of trying to establish a relationship between all the leagues. So they've started a sports and media entertainment ISAC, SMEISAC.com, little plug for that. Anyone in the sports and media entertainment industry should be looking at that, working with, we all talk together and work closely, but as Brian mentioned, we need to start coming up with some more structure, policies, plans, procedures, information sharing, threat intelligence, all the things that are very helpful for organizations. It's very important to work closely and also to have that direct line of communication. So if something does go sideways, you know exactly who to call. You can pick up the phone, get right to them. There's no delay in the response. The most valuable thing you can have is direct one-on-one communication and connections with the content organization, with the streamer, the provider, but also law enforcement, also your counsel, everyone that's involved in protecting that information. You should have deep and tight relationships. That way, it's a quick response and it's an efficient reaction if there is something that goes wrong.
Thanks, Dave. And how about you, Moses? I want to hear maybe a framework that you're using to, let's say, establish incident response or clear security boundaries.
Yeah, our incident response is pretty tailored at this point. We do see so many threats that we have something that's replayable. So we have our playbooks that, like you mentioned, we have counsel already on deck. We know each other by first names by now. We always see with brand recognition that we see, just the threats are usually targeted towards us, which is the pro and con of having such great brand recognition. But going back to just sharing, it's very much copycat. The threat landscape is very much a copycat. If someone's seeing something, an attack vector, there's a good chance that when I speak to Dave, it's going to be the exact same thing. Oh yeah, we had the exact same attack vector that was used against our end users. Somebody tried to phish them with the exact same emails, et cetera. So it's good to have that constant communication and the direct line of contact, et cetera. But speaking of like partnerships with Amazon, et cetera, I know we have events that are high leverage, starts of seasons, for example, where we do have to scope up, and having those partnerships in place definitely helps in order to go from not 0 to 100, but for lack of a better term, the same thing. So it's very much a conversational topic, which is amazing to say because we're talking about automation and AI, but having the leaders in the space being in the same room and having the same context, it definitely helps.
Yeah, there's still a significant human element in what we do.
Absolutely.
And that will never be replaced. I think these technologies will make us more efficient. They will make us, better at defense. But nothing can replace that human connection you have and the knowledge that you get from one another. And just at some level, it's a support mechanism. We're all going through the same stresses. We're going through the same situations. And like Moses said, oh yeah, I've seen that, or this is how we approach this, or this is how we defended against it, or this is what we're thinking about in terms of what we're going to face in the coming future. It's very important to be able to have that, and it certainly makes you feel better to know that you're not in it alone.
Absolutely. And on the topic of support group, right, that harkens back to Brian's point on a unified industry response. So maybe on the other side, we spent a lot of time talking about the risks that generative AI poses. What do you think about leveraging AI, for example, security defenses, right? Bolstering or enhancing existing security posture?
Yeah, great question. I think Gen AI has the opportunity to help us in a response perspective. It is still very human element driven now when it comes to response, doing analysis on threat actors, doing analysis on any sort of IOCs that are coming in or threats that we're seeing. I think Gen AI can help shorten that time for our analysts and our response teams to generate that fix or generate that defense. I think there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of innovation there. We're currently investing there from an Amazon perspective. I also think that the information sharing aspect of it, right? I think Gen AI can help shorten that time for we can disseminate information to either internal partners or to our external partners. Again, to say, hey, this is how threat actors are targeting us. I think there's a huge opportunity there to leverage Gen AI to, again, shorten that response time, because we're always going to be against time, right, when it comes to threats. And when we could use this technology to bring us closer to a resolution, I think it's beneficial for everyone.
And on the themes of incident response and resolution, right, think about, at the scale that Amazon operates, which is very massive, right? You're thinking about, tons of different streams coming in at every given second. How are you and your team innovating here at Amazon on helping, for example, industry players like NHL and DraftKings, help defend against all of these risks that we talked about?
No, that's a great question. I think we love our partnerships with both DraftKings and the NHL. We have a lot of partnerships across a lot of the sporting leagues. With the NFL, we have Thursday Night Football, and we have NASCAR coming up. And we think about every week when we're doing the Monday night game for NHL. We look at the volume of traffic that's coming in. We see how we're having to scale for that. That information shared with Dave. We also talk about the threats that we're seeing in that. Again, sharing that information, saying, Dave, as you start looking at other streams that you're doing for your content and on other platforms, this is how threat actors were targeting us. You could leverage this information to protect yourself. Same thing with kind of like DraftKings. It's always going to be that you're at the mercy of, and we're happy about it. You're at the mercy of that volume of customers coming in, and it depends on the content that you're streaming, whether it's NHL, whether it's the NFL or NBA that we'll be doing next year. We're going to see different threat actors coming based on that content, based on regions of the world, and again, gathering that and sharing it with our partners, I think is going to be hugely beneficial just for us as an industry.
And it's great for us because they have insight that we wouldn't necessarily see. They have a much broader scope than what we are focused on. So they can take a lot of additional information and enrich what they're giving us and give us a more complete picture about what they're seeing, what we should do to protect and defend. So having someone like Amazon and their resources is incredibly valuable for us. It also gives us a level of trust that we know they're protecting our information well. We know that what's delivered is going to be safe, if you will. And the technologies we're using with Amazon are very advanced. We've got some great AI tools that are coming out with Amazon now. One of them is called Edge IQ. It's a very cool technology for analysis of the game, and it really is something that can help not only the fans but the organization produce a higher quality product. But we know that Amazon has the resources and the ability to protect that beyond what an organization like us might have on hand at the time.
Yeah, that technology, I think it's so cool to actually see that technology.
Cool. Yeah.
I think it gives the consumer the ability to get closer to the game, understand the analytics of the game. We're doing that across multiple leagues, but it's really awesome to actually see that. And again, it's part of that digital transformation of media and entertainment, the digital transformation of sports. of where the sports leagues have come so far from, bringing that experience closer to the consumer. I think that's awesome. I think that's only going to get more advanced, but also is like, how can that data be weaponized, and how do we, again, stay connected so that we don't allow that to happen to our consumers?
And something that I would say Moses and Dave, you both touched on, right, is audience are no longer just passive spectators, right? They're getting more engaged. They're maybe even participating, as Brian just said. So how are you thinking about also the security challenges, across all of these multiple touch points, right, between spectators and also now players or the games?
It's very interactive now, which is great.
Yeah.
It's great for the end user and the observer. But it's difficult because now, as we talked about, the attacks expanding, the attack surface expanding, that's a much broader attack surface than it used to be. It used to be a one-way delivery. Now you've got attacks coming back that could be used against you from a consumer perspective. And you definitely have to think about what level of access you're giving people to information. You have to think about where they're coming from and what they're doing with that information. Are they taking it and rebroadcasting it or reusing it? So it's interesting. On one level, we've given a lot more tools to the end user. On another level, the attackers are taking those tools and using them back against us.
Oh yeah, it's definitely leveraged for the worse when the bad actors get their hands on it. But that's our challenge, right? To distinguish who our real customers are, make sure they have the seamless experience. We are nothing if not interactive, and we're constant, so we want that to be what the end users see, but also distinguish what's real and what's not real. In terms of traffic, it used to be just you could see incoming internet traffic, and that would be it. Here's a spike from this region. Here you go, shut that down. But bots are evolving, right? We were constantly seeing just traffic that looks very similar, but it's not. So we have to put our guardrails on our end to say, all right, we see misuse in actual platforms that we allow customers to use, and we have to be able to identify that misuse, and then secondarily go and attack that misuse, right? We're definitely behind the curve there because we're waiting for the volume. The volume dictates what we do, right? So the spike could just be, all right, everyone's excited for football to come back, or it could be someone's found that a login page is susceptible to something, and we need to identify that, and we have to do it quickly because this could impact not just monetarily, but the trust very quickly.
And that's another real challenge is the platform situation. We're across so many platforms now. No one, well, not many people at least, sit there and just watch a game anymore. People are usually on their phone or on another device or doing multiple things at once on various different platforms, whether it's social media platforms or gambling platforms or other platforms where people are actively engaged across multiple different aspects of the game. So you have to really think about all those platforms, what the threats are on all those, how to secure all those platforms properly. You have to be an expert in everything you're using to make sure you aren't leaving an unintended door open. And again, talking about AI, maybe some of those things can help you and say this is a best practice or this is what we see in the environment that you might want to change or address. Information coming from the partners, obviously working closely with a platform like AWS and all the knowledge they have and following best practices and doing a well-constructed architecture and having them help you with that. But it really sprawls. It's very difficult to do that across all the different platforms we work with and to make sure you are adequately protecting everyone to the most appropriate level.
I also think it goes back to your partnership as a security practitioner with the business. All of these new features that are introduced into the platform, they're there for the consumer. They're there to bring, again, the consumer closer. And as you offer these features increase your attack surface just by the nature of it, right? If a consumer can see it, a threat actor can see it, and that becomes an attack surface. So how do you partner with the business, ensure that that feature that is out there to, again, satisfy that customer need is put out there, to Dave's point, in a secure fashion, and that it does not introduce friction to the consumer, but does introduce friction to the threat actor. It is a tough balance. I think, again, Gen AI is really, skewing that balance to a certain extent. And again, as security practitioners, this is where we actually really need to lean in, really partner very well with the business, partner very well with our partners, so that we could say, this is how we're going to help generate these features or drive these features to the consumer to, again, bring that experience to fruition.
I think partnership is a really important word to use there because it's no longer, I'm just buying a product from this vendor and deploying it. You're really getting into a relationship, or you should be, with that vendor to make sure that you're using it well, that you're taking advantage of it, not just from a business perspective and getting that product out there and using it, but also from a management perspective, and make sure you're actually using it the way you should be.
Agree.
Actually, that Moses, I wanted to.
Oh no, I was going to echo everything these guys are saying. It makes perfect sense. To us, a lot of it also has to do with not just understanding what the product does, but also training against it, right? That's something we haven't touched on yet. We spend so much time and effort and training our end users internally and our different verticals within the organization. We don't really have that for our customers. Also, how would they even get it, right? We don't have a training platform that says, all right, this is how I identify X, Y, and Z, and also make it interactive enough so that they actually can digest it properly and not just sit through a training video, right? So it's twofold. It's understanding what we're bringing in terms of product, understanding our product going to the customers, and then letting our customers know, all right, this is real, this is how you identify it, which is very, very difficult because as product teams go, they want to get to the customers as fast as possible and then break that friction.
As a product person, I know and I hear you. So this actually brings us to, I think, the final topic before we open up to questions from the audience, which is, thinking about this vendor relationship, right, as you mentioned, because it is a very hard problem if you're thinking about securing now just not across multiple touch points with the end user or audience, but also across multiple platforms. So, for example, at NHL, how do you think about integrating new technology? How do you look at new security vendors?
Well, as mentioned, we definitely view it as a partnership with most of our vendors. It's not just buying a product and throwing it out there and we're good. We're working very closely with them. We're working closely with them to develop new features, our needs, other people's needs, working with them to find out what they're doing in their space. And it's something that you really need to work closely on with that vendor. And if you're not, then I don't think you're getting the most value out of it.
Agreed.
You really need to make sure that you've got that good relationship with them. And we try to utilize the products we have to the maximum extent. It's difficult sometimes because it takes expertise, as I mentioned. It takes time. You've got a lot of products. You've got a lot of threats. You've got a lot of stuff to work about, to think about and to work with. But ultimately, having the tight relationship with the vendor is incredibly important, and I think that's part of the vendor selection process. How well does that vendor work with you? How responsive are they? How knowledgeable are they about their own product? In many cases, there's vendors that don't understand what they're selling. So it's amazing. Like, you should be the expert at this. Well, actually, we're not quite sure how that works. And I've seen that happen a number of times, especially with cutting edge products that are iterating very fast. There's features that show up that sometimes even the vendor doesn't know about it because product development and engineering is throwing stuff into the mix at a very quick rate. I like that. I like being on the bleeding edge and seeing that, but you do need to get access to the right people to understand what they're doing and make sure you can use it appropriately.
And Moses, you've worked on the procurement side, right? So maybe can you speak to this vendor-buyer relationship from an enterprise buyer perspective?
Yeah, it's similar to what we talked about earlier with trust, right? So we talked about consumer trust. In this scenario, we're the consumer. There's a lot of shiny products, and we started this conversation by saying, some of them may not know what they're doing. So building that trust with third parties and products, et cetera, is very much a real thing. And I'm not a fan of patching singular needs with products because I don't think that gets you far, especially if you don't have a large enterprise to support it. So identifying how many needs we could fit within your risk profile in a singular product is the best way to approach it. Like, we're always risk-based with how we assess our program and our strategy. So whatever vendor we can get 3 out of 4 things out of is probably who we have the most trust with and who we could build with, right? So that's another thing. A lot of these companies throughout the years have been set it and forget it or similar to it. Here's our platform, use it. Oh, by the way, next year we're going to build in the next buzzword that comes in within our platform, which increases spend on top of it, right? So it's just a circle and this vicious cycle that we get stuck into, and then you realize that you're not really innovating. So breaking that cycle is very key, and identifying what makes sense to you may not always be what's in the magic quadrants of the world. So building trust and building within a platform is very much more key to procurement than getting the shiniest, prettiest, biggest booth.
Brian, coming back to you, Amazon arguably is one of the, I would say, most active hyperscalers, cloud providers working with startups, right? And so coming from an Amazon lens, What advice can you share with some of these startup founders in cybersecurity in the audience or watching online today? And how can they become a more proactive partner of Amazon Security?
That's a great question. We embrace innovation. So we like working with startups. We like when startups come to us from a partnership perspective. I think what Dave and Moses mentioned earlier about being a partner from a vendor perspective, I think startups and entrepreneurs to think like that. There is not one product that's going to solve it all. So as an entrepreneur, as a startup, when you speak to CISOs like Dave and Moses, is having that ability or the appetite to innovate with them. Not just saying, hey, my product is going to solve your problem. Like really listen to the problems that your future customers are having and saying, I am willing to innovate with you. Those are the type of startups I like to work with, that we can help mold that product towards the problem set that we're facing in the media and entertainment industry, from practitioners that are at the ground level, right? Think about that if you're an entrepreneur or a startup. Again, you don't really know the business until you understand the problems directly from the practitioners that are there. And at Amazon, again, we appreciate helping entrepreneurs and startups, but think about how to innovate with your consumer, not just trying to sell to them, is the best way to get traction in the space.
So innovating together. I know folks in the audience have probably had pent-up questions that they've wanted to ask our esteemed panelists here throughout this panel today. So wanted to also open up to all of you in the audience to ask us any questions. I believe there's a mic here. If you want to come to the center room, that way we can all hear your questions.
All right, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So my name is Chris here, and I had a question to see what is you guys' best, or how do I say, advice on bridging the gap between security and like customer experience? Because obviously we want to secure everything, every platform that we're on, but if users are constantly going through multiple factors of authentication, they might be discouraged on potentially using the product in the end. So I just want to get your thoughts on that.
I was having a hard time hearing that.
Do you mind actually holding the mic closer to...
Is this better?
Yes,
A little better,
perfect.
Okay, I'll restate it. I wanted to hear best practices on bridging the gap between customer experience and security when it comes to using platforms, because we know that going through multiple stages of security can discourage customers from actually using a product.
Yeah, I can start with that. Yeah, so inherently with regulated platforms, you have that customer experience that is triggered where you have to either verify yourself multiple times or time out, et cetera. So you have all these guardrails that are built in place, which is just something we just can't go past, and it's built for customer safety. So we build as seamless as possible around that, and that's kind of like our median to meet the customers halfway. This is what we expect from you, and this is how we keep you safe. And also we go for regulated gaming, et cetera. We want to make sure that consumers are safe as possible. So building security around the most regulated parts of a customer experience is something that we really key on. And we talked about product, right? So they really want to, I wouldn't say circumvent, but be as tightly niche as possible. So when we build any new products, features, et cetera, that part is always, it's the regulatory piece, and the consumer piece will be very much tight-knit.
I think education is certainly hugely important. Like, people should understand what you're trying to do. They should understand the technology that you're putting in place to protect them. And that's not just with consumers, that's in our organizations as well. We spend a lot of time trying to educate and explain why we do what we do, why you have to do two-factor with number challenging now, why you have to use a hardware token, why you have these increased levels of security. People don't always understand. They just see it as a barrier of entry, and it's keeping them from getting their job done, or it's keeping them from getting access to the product. When you have to prove your identity or reset your account, it's important for people to understand why that is necessary. And I have a bit of a personal motto. It's I'd rather educate than investigate. Because if we educate properly, we won't get to the point where we have to do an investigation. So if people have that knowledge, not only they'll feel more comfortable that they're secure, but they'll understand that yes, that may be a bit of a hurdle, but it's necessary in order to protect them, to protect the integrity of the product, and overall protect the space in general.
And when you mention people, I don't think we just mean the end users either. It's our internal folks as well.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of friction or a lot of questions that are asked similarly. So it's education, internal and external.
Plus one to both, what David and Moses said. We talk about this a lot at Amazon GME Security. We talk about securing the customer experience. What we look at is we look at the products across the GME landscape, whether that's Prime Video, Audible, Twitch, games, music, whatever it is. Let's look at that customer experience and say, where is there an opportunity for a threat actor to impact that experience? So where are we putting that security? We also work with the product teams and say, where is the highest abandonment rate in that experience? Maybe that's not where we want to put the security feature because we don't want consumers to leave the platform. So it's that balance be saying, we're going to protect that security, we're going to secure that customer experience, but also make sure that we're securing the platform so that it doesn't introduce risk. So I think, again, plus one to both David and Moses, but understanding that security experience or understanding the customer experience so you can put the right security solution in place is key. If you do not understand the customer experience, you should not be making recommendations on where to put security because you will absolutely impact the way that consumers come in.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Rex. Thank you so much for the thought-provoking discussion.
Can you get a little closer to the mic? Yep.
Yeah, you can probably pull it up. Yeah.
Is that better? Yeah. Thank you so much for the thought-provoking discussion. I'm curious about how you guys are using Gen AI for security in your environment today, and what kind of success you have seen.
Yeah, we're using it in a number of areas. It's obviously built into a lot of products. So you're seeing every security product say AI enabled or powered by AI. That's a very common thing. But internally, we're trying to develop our own models where commercial products don't fit or we don't want to use them. You don't always want to send your most sensitive data to a third party for various reasons. So having internal systems that can really aggregate information across lots of different platforms, as we talked about before, or platforms that just aren't supported by commercial products. A lot of us have legacy environments that aren't something that more advanced organizations are focusing on because it's really something that is deprecated or not used much anymore, so there's not a lot of focus on it. So we have to support and deal with those as well. But really, I think the most important thing that it does for us is make us quicker to respond and able to see a broader landscape than we would just see by going into individual platforms. Using it to aggregate information from across all the different products we use is probably the most valuable way that I see it being used currently. Because in the old days, it was I'd have to go here to find that information, I'd have to go there to get that, then I'd have to put a story together. And now we can use tools, AI tools, to kind of bring all that together at once, give us a consolidated view on stuff and react to it quickly. And that's very valuable for us.
Yeah, it's half and half for us. It's a lot of it is using the tools to the best of our abilities and be as scalable as possible. We're a very high velocity environment on the security side. So identifying and aggregating as much as possible and having the median time to response being as quick as possible is how we use it. But secondarily, within our environment, right, we want to make sure we have the proper guardrails in place for every new technology that turns on AI, right? I can't tell you the number of times with the most benign of technology that has turned on an AI functionality, and we have to go investigate to see what it actually does. We don't want it to go into a third party sometimes. And it's not just engineering teams, right? Every vertical has a form of it. So we spend the other half of our time trying to, lasso everything in and providing actual guardrails around security and AI within our organization so that we don't have data leak or misuse.
Yeah, using AI to find AI is something that's very common these days.
Inception, right?
Yeah. It's AI all the way down. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello there. Thank you for a thought-provoking talk. I guess I'd just love if you guys could leave us with some ideas for kind of further reading on the subjects that you've discussed, where we can get some more information along these lines. Because I don't hear a lot of good discussion of some of this in the industry, and also maybe some practical pointers of, if we were to take something away and actually action it when we return home, what would you guys suggest is sort of the key, biggest thing?
Yeah, practical use. when you go back to an organization or if you're going back to the consumer base, try to leverage what you do in real life to what you would do in an organization, because that's the best way to also explain and educate your users. So that's the most practical way of saying this. Would you trust someone with your credit card information if it wasn't at DraftKings? If someone just called you up and said that, would that be the case? Why would that be any different when you think it's DraftKings calling you, right? So using practicability and just understanding common sensibility when it comes to just end user behavior, that's one way to do it. In terms of enterprise, grab a hold of it. Identification is the first part. If you don't know what you're actually looking for, you'll never get your hands around it. So be aware of what's in your enterprise. Make sure it's not shadow IT. Make sure there's not AI environments that are actively being used within your build infrastructure, et cetera. That was the first thing every organization saw when it was easier to code using ChatGPT, is that organizations were putting proprietary information in there without any sort of NDAs or guardrails. Obviously very dangerous, and it could get out of control. So that's why when I say get your hands around first, that's what I mean.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It's a very practical approach, is starting with your data, right? Most people don't have a good grasp on all of their data, where it is, what it is, who's using it. So one of the first things you can do as far as a step towards using some of these tools is going out there and finding out what you have and classifying it and understanding how to protect it appropriately. Data governance is a huge point for using AI. It's what the AI vendors recommend. They recommend that you have good data governance and good data hygiene, and you don't unleash AI on something you don't want to, lest you have unintended consequences. So that's a real practical approach. As far as the other point about where do you go to get information, you're right, there is no consolidated place. Again, maybe that's something that could be done with some of these tools, is to consolidate that information. But you really have to go around to different venues, whether it's on social media sites, Blue Sky, where you've got experts posting and talking about things, or forums, or an ISAC, like I mentioned. So if you're in the industry, you get involved with the ISAC and you start having these conversations and sharing information. And again, making those one-on-one conversations. The most valuable information resource I have are my peers, and having regular discussions with them and regular meetings, and just informal chats, being able to sit together and say, yeah, we've seen this, you should think about that. It's very, very valuable, especially when there's not someone putting all of it together in a consolidated place. But I do think that we should work harder on having better information out there for people to educate themselves, because as mentioned, that's one of the most valuable things you can do.
Yeah, and as an industry, I think we have that issue with being siloed anyway, which we're trying to break, but it's a tough endeavor. You can only sanitize so much information. There's a lot of information, but unfortunately, like you said, we don't have a correlated place for all of it, but it's also constantly changing. What I tell you today could not be the same thing when we talk next week. So it's got to be information on the know, just like we talked about information to our end users. It's got to be constantly evolving in terms of what's new and what's accessible to us.
Yeah, I think that plus one, to both of those statements. I think the information sharing across the media and entertainment industry from a threat perspective, I love what you said, Dave, like the ISAC. I think that's incredibly important. I mean, for media and entertainment industry practitioners to participate, all right, to get that. Where to get information on some of the topics that we talked about, specific to kind of like misinformation and deepfake. That's a problem that folks don't know where to get that source of truth, right? And I think that's why it's important for us as security practitioners in this space to come up with that and really, again, to my earlier point, drive that industry change, drive that policy change that is absolutely needed, because the consumer's asking for it. And we really need to protect the consumers from that type of attack that's happening. Like information warfare with disinformation, it's happening. It's absolutely happening. And if we don't take a stance in the media and entertainment industry to stop it or to help the consumers, we're really not doing anything much there.
Yeah, and a lot of the information out there right now is very sensational, right? It's clickbait, it's headline generating, it's something that you could sell views with. But we do need to have more technical information. We need to have more available resources for people to deploy. We need to have experts that can sit and talk with people about what to do. It's very hard to come across people who know all the facets, or at least a lot of the facets of these emerging technologies. So being able to have access to those people is certainly very valuable, and it's something we're very open to. I mean, as I mentioned, I love talking about it, and we're happy to discuss this with anyone, and everyone's welcome to reach out. We'll talk to you directly, but also, stay abreast of what's going on in the industry and just the news across all the different platforms. It is hard right now to focus on one place, but if you look at some of the more technical arenas where people are discussing this, you'll find some pretty good information.
Agreed. Last one.
That was a great final question to end on, and certainly a lot of resources to whoever asked that question, I believe is you, right? ISAC, different support groups, back to your earlier point, Dave, right? Different peers in industry, CISO circles. That said, I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Brian, Director of Security for Amazon Game Media Entertainment, and Moses, Director of InfoSec for DraftKings, and also finally, Dave, SVP of IT and Security for NHL. Thank you all so much.